Yeah, what we've seen in the housing market in Clare over the course of 2025, it really mirrors what we've seen elsewhere in the country. So at the end of 2025, prices in Clare were about 5.2% on average higher than a year before. That's across all different property types in all parts of the county. That's, as I say, in line with both the Munster region as a whole, where the increase was about 5.7%, and indeed the country as a whole, where it was 5.5%. So the country as a whole is marked by, once again, a lack of supply in the face of strong demand that's pulling up prices. And I think Clare is a very good example of that, especially given its location between the two cities of Galway and Limerick.
Yeah, and I think that's seen in the median price rise, which is up about 14% on last year, and it's coming in line or closer in line to prices in Limerick City and Galway City.
That's right. The housing market is still seeing a kind of a reshuffling of demand post COVID and the move to remote and hybrid working, where those cheaper markets that have good access to the cities and the cities' labour markets, and they're seeing big increases in prices. So if we look at, say, a detached four-bed house in Clare, the average price now €436,000, and that's up 7% year on year. So strong demand for that kind of property. And if you think back to even 6 or 7 years ago, the average price of a four-bed detached home in the county wouldn't have been anything like €430,000. It just goes to show the impact that remote working has had in the context of very tight supply.
Yeah, I suppose the two of the more striking figures were the percentage increase or in terraced homes. Figures there 22% and 32% in 3 and 4 bed terraced homes. Is there a particular emphasis or reason for that?
I think with those, overall, we try to adjust for the mix of properties. So the headline indices, like that 5.2% figure for Clare as a whole, that comes from controlling for all the different kinds of elements that you need to, like the where within the county and the energy efficiency and so on. The snapshots are just what is in the market at a particular point in time. So it could be the case both with terrace properties that there are not that many terrace properties of a particular size in the county in a particular period, and indeed the mix may change. It might be Ennis in mostly Ennis in one period and mostly elsewhere in a different period. And so I probably wouldn't read too much into those big increases just for those particular property types, other than the fact that that's, if you were looking for a two-bed terraced at a particular point in time, that's what's out there in the county at the moment. But on a like-for-like basis, the increases are substantial, but more like 5 or 6%.
And as you said there, that figure is a snapshot at a particular time. What was the stock like in Clare when this particular snapshot in the Daft.ie report was taken?
Good question. So, if we look overall, the stock of homes across the country and indeed in Clare is down. It's down about a one third of what it would traditionally have been in the late 2010s in terms of how many homes are available to buy at any particular point in time. In terms of the number of properties that go in, that the Clare market has seen a kind of a reasonable volume of listings, about 200 properties put up for sale in the final quarter of the year. That is down a little bit on a year ago, but that's common across most of the country now, that the volume of homes is being hit by the increase in interest rates over the last few years. As people roll off those fixed interest rates, they might have fixed for 3 years or 5 years a number of years ago. That may mean that we see more second-hand activity in 2026 and in particular in 2027.
Yeah, and it is one of the key findings at the top of this report that the consistent increase over the last couple of years is mainly down to this lack of supply and lack of new houses coming onto the market.
Yeah, I talked about the availability. If we look at Munster outside the cities, overall across the entire counties there outside the cities, 2,200 second-hand homes actively for sale in December. That's down on what it was a year ago. That number itself is both supply and demand. How many are on the market? Of course, if they're sold, they'll come off the market. The other way of getting at this is how many properties were put up for sale over the course of the year. and that's still about 28% below where it was pre-COVID. It is up slightly year on year, as I mentioned, to do with people rolling off fixed interest rates, but the market seems to have got caught in this low supply equilibrium. And anything that will help, and the most obvious thing that will help, is significantly more building of new homes. But I think for many parts of the country, including Clare, that we're not seeing enough new homes being built at the moment.
And is that where this 5% market heat figure comes from as well, in that there is such the demand for homes that people are willing to pay that bit extra to ensure that they get the house that they're looking for?
That's right. So market heat is as a term we use in the report to refer to what's the typical gap between the initial listed price and the price the property ultimately sells for, that you can see on the property price register. And now, of course, there'll be some time will have passed. If a property is put up for sale in January, it may go sale agreed in March and ultimately sell in April, and prices may have gone up in that intervening period. Nonetheless, we can look at that measure of market heat over time, and say 2016, 17, 18, when it was still a seller's market, there was typically no gap between the initial listed price and the transactions price. Now in Munster, there's almost 8% above the initial listed price is the typical gap, with the final transaction price being significantly above that initial listed price.
And just getting back to that point of getting new supply onto the market, is it an issue in your eyes, do you see, with the amount of objections there is to large scale planning developments or even larger scale wastewater developments?
Yeah, there's two important topics there. One is about the system within which housing operates. So all of the ancillary services, whether they're infrastructure related, like wastewater and water, or utilities like electricity or broadband, whether they're traffic and transport, or whether indeed there may be softer services, but nonetheless important, like education, childcare, and healthcare. All of that is critical in relation to these growing pains that the Irish economy is suffering from at the moment. And then specifically on housing, you mentioned objections. It's not so much that communities shouldn't have a say in what is built in their area. It's just that compared to other countries, we don't have a well-functioning way of doing that. In many other countries, that there are certain criteria around what kind of homes you can build, and if a site is zoned residential, then you can build those kinds of homes. It isn't really up for discussion about, well, if you meet the standards, then of course you can build. In Ireland, we have a much more complicated system, and a system with much more uncertainty, and that uncertainty ultimately pushes up prices. Maybe not necessarily land prices, but it pushes up the cost of capital, because the money tied up in housing gets tied up for a lot longer. And that is something ultimately that the residents pay for, not the developers or the investors. So we're costing ourselves housing, and the housing is more expensive because we have such an uncertain system. That would be something I would be looking to, if I were a policymaker, I'd be looking to prioritise in 2026.